Okay, yeah, so we have our fundamental data types, which are these, right? And then we have classes, and classes are just like data types you make. So like variables, those are like technically classes. So like if I put a is equal to 5, I made this new data type a, and I've put it to 5. So, this is technically a class. So, yeah, and there's also another type of data called specialized data types. And specialized data types, they're kind of advanced. We'll get into them like later in the year. But sometimes there's things you want to do and Python doesn't have them. So you're gonna have to like import them. Like remember when we made our tic-tac-toe game and Python didn't have a way to make our choice random, right? So we had to import this library called random. And that random library, that's a specialized data type. It does a special thing and it's not in Python. So we have to we have to either make it ourselves or maybe someone else has made it and we just have to put it into our code. We have all this, right? We have our fundamental data types. Let's talk about numbers in Python. So in Python, numbers are two types of data, our integer and our float. So numbers are int and float. So int stands for integer, it's just short for integer. And float stands for floating point number. Yeah, but you don't really want to say the whole thing floating point number, so they just write it as float. They've shortened it a bit. So integers are any whole numbers. So like 3, 4, 5, 5, 2, 1, 2, those are all integers, right? Okay, they're all whole numbers. And keep in mind that any number, right, int and float, the main thing they use for is mathematical functions. So like, I'm just gonna delete these, right? So int and float are over here. Keep in mind those are numbers. So let's say we do something like 5 plus 3, right? This is like a form of math because these two are both integers and we're doing something with them, we're adding them. So our numbers, our integers, they're always used for math. And if we run this, well, we're not going to get anything because remember we have to like print this. So like if we can print it, right, like we can print 5 plus 3 and we get 8, right? So it's like that. So these numbers, they're good for math. You use them for math. So also, yeah, keep in mind, remember that our print function is we write print, we write our little brackets, and then we write whatever we want to do inside. So let's say we want to print 5 plus 3, so we did that. So also, you don't have to just do it like what I did addition. With these numbers, you can do addition. Okay, I'm gonna write this as a comment. You can do addition, you can do subtraction, you can do multiplication, and division. So basically everything you learned in like math class, you can do this in Python with your numbers. So now let's talk about a thing called type. So also, right, if we have this number 5, we can do it like, what we can do is we can do print type of 5. And all what I've done here is, right, like, so we have the number 5. So type is another like function. You write it like this, type, and then you put whatever you want inside the little parentheses. So type literally tells us what type of data type we have. So what we're gonna do is if we print type of 5, and like this syntax, like the way it's written might be a little bit confusing. So like, remember our print is like this, right? And then what we want to print is we want to print our type. So our type, remember our type is written like this. So we print our type. So we type in print, then we type in our type, and then like we get this, right? This is how you write it. Yeah, this might seem a little bit confusing, but like as you keep on programming, as you go on, like you'll get really used to this stuff. So what happens is, what you're gonna see is if we print this, we get class is equal to int. And remember int is integer. So we get this type is an integer. So yeah, so like that's how it works. So let's do, remember how I said we can do addition, subtraction, multiplication, whatever? So let's do type 5 plus 5. Let's also print the type of, let's see, 3 minus 2. We can do multiplication, so we can print type 5 times 5. And if you look right here, is that in Python, our multiplication, we don't write an X, we write this little asterisk. And the way you do that is you press like Shift and then 8. And you get this little asterisk. And that asterisk, that means multiplication in Python. So, oops. Yeah, that's how you multiply in Python. And then division. We can also do division. So we can do print type. Let's do like 5 divided by 3. Okay. So yeah, we have our different things. So these are all like different like things we can do with numbers in Python. Okay. So yeah. So now let's just check our types for all of these. So what you see here is that like for this first part, 5 plus 5, we get our class of integer. For 3 minus 2, we also get an integer. For 5 times 5, we get integer. But then for 5 divided by 3, we get a float. So let's talk about float now. So float is the second type of number. So a float is any number with a decimal. So even like, so examples of float include like, 35.6001, 0.00001, even 0.0, even though that's nothing, that's still technically a float because it has this decimal place, right? So yeah, so a good thing about a float though is because a float is still a type of number, you can use it with you can use math with it. You can do math with floats. So yeah, we did that. So but there's a difference, right? The reason there's a difference between an integer and a float is that, remember how we have our computer converts everything to binary, right? To a bunch of zeros and ones. So whenever we have a number, right? Like whenever we have an integer like 5, basically our computer, it takes this 5 and it converts it to binary. So it converts it to zeros and ones. And this, it doesn't take up very much memory. It doesn't take up very much space, right? But if we were to write like 5.0, this takes up way more memory than this. Because because we have this little dot right here, our computer, it doesn't really know what to do with that dot. So like in this one, it will just take the number 5 and it creates it as one piece of binary. But if our 5.00, what the computer does is it splits, it takes this 5 and then it takes everything after the decimal, like these two zeros, and it puts them as two separate binary parts. So so typically floats, they end up taking more memory. They don't really take like, it's not a big deal, but that's really the difference between them. The computer, even though 5 and 5.00, they're the exact same things. Oh, oops, 5.00. This 5.00, it takes up more memory than just this 5 by itself. So that's with floats. That's how it works. So yeah. So the computer, it basically just kind of splits into two. And then also remember that we can do math with both integers and floats. So we can even add like integers and floats together. So we could do like 5, which is an integer, plus 3.3. So this is a float, this is an integer, and if we run it, you see we get 8.3. So because they're both numbers, we can add them together. So yeah, so that's the point. So yeah, but then also what you'll notice is that even if we do something like 5.0 plus 5.0, we get 10.0, which is a float, right? So basically a rule is if you take any number and you add it or you multiply it or you subtract it with a float, you will always get a float. So even 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5, if we take the type of that, so the type of 5.0 plus 5.0, we get that it's a float. But if we get rid of the 0.0, yeah, we get it's an int. So anytime you take one number and then you add it or you subtract it or you multiply it or you divide it with a float, your answer is going to become a float. So, that's just an interesting thing with Python. So, yeah, so just remember also that Python, it uses these numbers for math, right? And even though you can do this stuff, you could also do more stuff with it. You could do more math things with numbers. So like you could use this thing. You could do to the power of. So you remember power, like 3 to the power of 3 is 3 times 3 times 3. So in order to do a power 2, you type in 2 little asterisks. So for multiplication, you type in 1. For 2, you type in 3. So like if we do right here, if we take, let's print something. So like print 2 to the power of 2. So this means it's going to take 2 and it's going to multiply it by itself twice. So 2 times 2. And if you let it load, or my computer's kind of slow, but this will give us 4 because but I could change it to something like 2 to the power of 3. And what 2 to the power of 3 is, it takes 2 and it multiplies it by itself 3 times. So 2 times 2 times 2. And that gets me 8, right? Because this is the exact same thing as 2 times 2 times 2. So yeah, these things are the exact same. So that's how you do that. You can also do this thing called where you take these like 2 little instead of writing just 1 dash for divide, you write 2 dashes for divide. So whenever you write these 2 dashes, basically it takes your answer and it rounds it down to the smallest number. So if we take 10 divided by 3, that gives us 3.3 something, right? But it'll round it down. So like 10 divided by 10, normally divided by 3, it gives us 3.3333. But whenever we put these 2 dashes, it just rounds it down. It just rounds it. So we could also do it like 4, or we could do it like I guess 1. So so basically this 2 dashes, it means that it rounds it down. It rounds the number.